Hi, for this week's reflection, I was looking to do something a little bit different. I wanted to do a video reflection in lieu of the keynotes, which I've been doing quite a bit of lately. So I would rather just sort of reflect in this method, if that's quite all right. And so basically, just to jump right in, not really going to go too much into RTI, considering, as you said in the directions, basically, we've already sort of covered that, and we already know what RTI is. To begin with, when I began reading the New York State's website, I found out that effective July 1st, 2012, all school districts in New York must have an RTI program in place as part of its evaluation process to determine if a student in grades K through 4 with a learning disability in an area of reading. That's kind of the complication. A lot of these modules and information, they really focused on the earlier grades. And being a secondary teacher myself, I tried to make that information sort of applicable to myself. And I understand that it's K through 4, and then later on as we get to the putting it all together module and taking a closer look at Tier 3, they really begin to talk about early intervention programs, which is central to basically intervening at an early rate before it gets the students actually failing, as we know is the key to RTI. But I still think that it's applicable in the secondary, as I'll talk about in just a second. The reading program module, I wanted to take a really close look at that one, considering that reading and literacy is going to be the most applicable to me as a secondary ELA teacher. What I found that even though I don't necessarily have the foundational aspects of reading that somebody in the elementary school might have, that the same basic concepts work, especially with students who are secondary language learners. So they discussed a few of the concepts that you need to really focus on, like phonemic awareness, I can never pronounce that, phonics and word study, fluency, vocabulary, reading comprehension, and like phonemic awareness, that these phonemes might be different depending on the dialect, the culture, and the first language, again with ELL students. Phonics and word study, understanding that the student's culture and word use, a lot of these elements have to do with really their culture, their background. As we already know that individuals that come from lower socioeconomic statuses typically have a considerably lower vocabulary than somebody from a higher socioeconomic. It's just, especially content-specific language. So it discusses sort of the means that you'd go about intervening and providing them with that remedial instruction. Getting right into it, fluency, reading simultaneously while with tape-assisted reading. I understand that this module is a little bit older. Obviously, now that we have iBooks Author, it's completely changed the way that we sort of scaffold a student's reading. What I really like is with iBooks Author, I'll provide directions and then I'll put the little narration button so they can actually hear my voice reading it as we go along. So it kind of just provides them with that scaffolding, that motivation as you progress through it, especially with directions. I love being able to actually narrate to the students or create videos to sort of explain it. It's just providing that multimodal access. And then vocabularies we were just talking about. It's not about the inability to hear the word, but to understand the meaning behind the word. Especially, again, this focused a lot with secondary language learners. It's really not about the word that they can understand. They can mirror it as well. Individuals who are ELL or students with disability. It's about that meaning, connecting that meaning, and the best way to mediate that. And I did so when I was ELL tutor at SUNY Fredonia, is providing context within their culture, their experiences, because something that's completely unfamiliar to them isn't going to link with their schema, therefore it's just going to remain unfamiliar. So basically finding those things within their culture and within their language to make those connections. Reading comprehension, that teachers should help build the connection between text and meaning by applying students' culture and experiences to the text. And using assessment methods like DIBELS. There was actually an entire sheet of different references that you could take, different standardized exams that you could test reading ability and capability, and basically compare it to individuals on a national level for expectations and ability. Later in another module, I believe it was the putting it all together, they began to talk about generalized assessments for the entire class at an earlier rate, but I'll get to that in just a moment. The module, putting it all together, stated that teachers should implement universal screening in order to determine the approach needed for the classroom. This is where it became a little difficult for me. Again, I'm trying to pull in anything that I can for the secondary level. So I understand that they're doing these universal assessments, assessments such as like DIBELS, that allow you to assess where a student is at a particular time and sort of just mediate that in order to begin implementing the response to intervention. At the secondary level, though, I wonder if you necessarily would do the universal screening, or if that's something that's more particular to the primary age, especially the K through 4, when before they really don't have other assessments in the same way that they have by the time they've got into 9th, 10th, or 11th grade. So I would be interested if you do your reflection or your response to student questions, whether or not doing a universal screening would be appropriate at the secondary level. Also within this and quite a few of the other modules, I talked about the general education teacher utilizing several charts to track the development of the child. As we had talked about before with the RTI model, it's really about very specific tracking and checking what interventions work, what modifications, what accommodations, and seeing what is beneficial for the student. What I really liked in the YouTube video, the response to intervention, data-based decision-making, was the team approach. You don't see it as often, unfortunately, in the secondary level, but when I was working in the middle school level, the team approach was really effective, because I only see that student for perhaps maybe 40 minutes a day, and I really don't have the full picture, but collectively we could sort of say, you know what, his reading comprehension isn't very good. So as the module suggested, perhaps that is one of the root causes why he or she is not being that successful in social studies. How can they understand the concepts if they can't even understand the language that's being used, because there's no contextual connection between that and their experiences, their previous knowledge? So having that team approach to basically say, all right, let's assess the data, let's assess how they're doing actually within the classes, and our personal interventions and modifications, basically utilizing others' knowledge of the student and their skills and pedagogical intervention styles in order to model it for the student. The one question was, it was in the, I believe it was looking closer at Tier 3. They talked about Felipe in the wrap-up section, preparing to enter Tier 3 intervention, talking about how they spoke with the parents, provided them with a Spanish booklet basically on their rights, the rights of their son, and what Tier 3, that more solidified instruction, would entail, and how he would be classified as an individual with special needs. We actually had a young girl in my school who was an ELL learner, so it was actually really complicated within the context of the school to establish what was going on. She was actually, we began to learn illiterate in, or not illiterate, but she can read a little bit of Spanish, she could speak fluently, and she could not write it whatsoever. So when she came in, we had a lot of difficulty at trying to establish what level she was at, how to make accommodations and modifications, and really just sort of lost for what to do, period. So what we ended up doing is we had to use those national state assessments, and actually a couple individuals who spoke Spanish at her school to sort of just create that communication to initially assess what it was that she needed and what we could do to try to help her out. Inevitably, it was shown that she had a learning disability on top of being a second language learner, something that I don't think without the national assessments and the tracking of the interventions that we would have necessarily learned. So again, basically what I learned about RTI this time around was much more about the reading programs, taking a closer look at the team approach of creating an RTI program, utilizing the programs and materials that you have available at your school, and inevitably sort of linking it to some of my own experiences with RTI within the context of my school. So that being said, hopefully that was an adequate reflection. Have a great week. Thank you.